You're listening to Upstream with Shane Morris on the Colson Center Podcast Network.
Welcome to Upstream, a podcast of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. I'm Shane Morris. The pro-life movement in America is at a crossroads right now, and there are two reasons. First, abortion rates, especially late-term surgical abortions, the kind we often talk about and think about, are on the decline and have been for some time. The pro-abortion Guttmacher Institute reports that the number of abortions in this country actually fell by almost 20% from 2011 to 2017 and continue to tumble. Now, this may sound like good news to pro-lifers, except for the second shift. Increasingly, abortion is becoming a do-it-yourself practice, accomplished not through surgery at clinics, but through taking pills at home. Well, this privatizing and concealing of abortion is actually accelerating as pro-choice legislators seek to deregulate the so-called abortion pill. But what is this medication exactly? Is it as safe as we've been told? And is privatizing abortion in this way really a step forward for our society? Joining me today to answer these and other questions is a very special guest. Lila Rose is a speaker, writer, podcast host, and human rights activist. She's founded and served as president of Live Action, a media and news nonprofit dedicated to ending abortion and inspiring a culture that respects all human life. She's one of the best-known faces of the young pro-life movement and a good friend of the Colson Center. Lila, welcome to Upstream. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Shane.
And by the way, you're a new mom yourself, right?
I am, yes. Very blessed new mom. Got a 7-month-old. Wonderful.
Congratulations. And God's blessings and good luck with that, because I know that's difficult. I have 3 kids myself.
Oh, that's awesome.
well, Lila, tell us about the abortion pill. What's the history of this thing? You know, it's marketed as safe, just like a woman's monthly cycle is often the way the marketing language goes, and pro-abortion writers kind of sell it to us. But is that true?
Sure. So a number of things for everyone to be aware of with the abortion pill. The abortion pill, it's chemical abortion, so it's basically a pill regimen that consists of 2 different kinds of pills. One that is designed to starve the embryo, so these are committed in the first trimester of pregnancy between the ages roughly of 7 to 10 or 11 weeks old. So the heart is already beating, the anatomical structures for their entire neurosystem is in place, their jawbone is already developing and starting to form. They've got arms, legs, at least the buds to begin to develop into arms and legs. Fingers are beginning to develop. So this child is rapidly developing, and the first pill in this chemical abortion pill regimen is designed to target the baby's body for destruction. So it's called Mifeprex, and it basically starves the baby of nutrients from the mother, so that when the baby is implanted in the mother's uterus, the lining of the mother's uterine wall, it starves the child. Then the second pill in the pill regimen ultimately forces a miscarriage, so forces that baby to be expelled from the mother's body. And again, this is done entirely in the woman's home. She could be driving in the car. She's doing extremely heavy bleeding, diarrhea, vomiting often. And often these women or girls having these abortions, these home abortions or these bathroom abortions, after taking that second pill and after sometimes days of bleeding and vomiting and this whole ordeal, then they sometimes see the baby. They can actually see their child in the toilet or in their hands or on the floor. So it's absolutely horrific. It's an act of killing, murder against that child, but it's also traumatic and dangerous for the woman. And since the FDA legalized the abortion pill regimen over 20 years ago, there have been over 24 deaths of women who have died from taking this because it can be life-threatening for the mother. And there have been nearly 4 million children that have been killed this way. And right now is a really interesting time and a really crucial time, because the abortion industry is trying to push the largest expansion of abortion that they've ever done, I think, since Roe v. Wade. And what I mean by this is they're seeing the pandemic, COVID-19, they're seeing the closure of a lot of brick and mortar abortion facilities, both due to the pandemic and then also due to the fact that demand is lessening in a lot of communities for abortion, and the work of pro-life activists, the work of the amazing pro-life movement. And so they're trying to find a way to shortcut the abortion procedure so that they can still make a buck. They can still make hundreds of dollars off of every chemical abortion, but all they have to do is put some pills in the mail and do basically a telemedicine. I mean, it's not actual medicine, but do this long distance abortion. And that's what they're trying to do now. So they actually got a Obama appointed federal judge just a few weeks ago to lift do a temporary a stay order against the basic regulations under the FDA that have been in place, which govern the abortion pill. So for the last several years, I mean, under President Obama, those regulations were loosened, but since 2016, at least, there have been these REMS. It's called a regulatory enforcement policy, basically, for the abortion pill, which would mean that a woman at least needs to be seen by a doctor. She needs to be seen by a medical professional. And the reason that this is important with the abortion pill is because it's done in the first trimester. And this woman, they have to confirm pregnancy and also need to be alert to a potential ectopic pregnancy. So about 1% of all pregnancies are ectopic, meaning the baby is not implanted in the mother's womb. The baby might be implanted in the fallopian tube or in another part of the mother's abdominal cavity. And if the baby develops in this place, it can be life-threatening for the mother and the baby. Well, the abortion pill doesn't distinguish. So when a woman takes the abortion pill, she might have an ectopic pregnancy. She could be successfully killing the baby with that ectopic pregnancy with the abortion pill, but she's not able to miscarry or abort that baby the way you would a baby that is implanted in the uterus. And so it can actually be life-threatening for the mother, and she wouldn't know the difference because in an ectopic pregnancy, the symptoms are the same, bleeding, abdominal pain, as the symptoms for the abortion pill. So this is just another layer of lethality. I mean, it's first of all lethal for the baby, but another way that this could be potentially lethal for women. And the abortion industry doesn't care about women or babies, obviously, and they don't care. They tried to get, they got this federal judge to temporarily lift these safety standards, and now they're trying to basically mass distribute the abortion pill, sending them to potentially millions of households. Potentially young girls could be purchasing this online. It could even be purchased by the abuser of an abuse victim who just orders it online and it's just sent to them via mail. I mean, there are so many facets to this that just make it that much more dangerous and that much more deadly. But regardless, the pill should not even be legal, because the FDA and the government has the job to ensure that there's no deadly drugs in the market that can cause undue harm to human beings, but this pill is designed to be deadly.
And this sort of explains the impetus behind this new campaign that Live Action is starting on the history and the funding and the future of the abortion pill. It includes a petition, by the way, to ban the sale of this medication in the U.S., which is, a truly lofty goal, but wouldn't it be incredible if we could achieve that?
Well, look, the FDA intervenes and has banned other drugs before that are deadly and harmful. I mean, that's part of their governing policy at the FDA, is to ensure that they are protecting the public welfare and that the drugs that they permit on the market are not going to cause serious problems for the public. Well, this drug is designed to kill. So there's no universe in which it's acceptable for the FDA to approve this drug. And the history here, you mentioned the importance of the history, Shane. The history here is that this drug was first approved in a fast track process by the FDA under President then Bill Clinton, who was rapidly pro-abortion. And it was done, it wasn't done without medical experts weighing in. It wasn't done with the question of the morality or even whether or not it should be permitted to have chemical drugs killing children in America. Right. It was fast-tracked by a political act of an administration that was very pro-abortion. And since then, we've had almost 4 million deaths. So it is time for the FDA to do the right thing and to ban this drug.
Make the impact of the abortion pill human for us here, Lila. I realize this is a sensitive subject and we have to be careful what we say, but so use whatever discretion you need, but describe for us what a woman is going to go through potentially if she takes this kind of medication.
Right. And first off, I recommend, I mentioned this a little earlier, the process, and I'll speak to it more, but I highly recommend everybody's educated on this, because this is the new frontier for the abortion industry. They want to make abortions home abortions. I mean, forget the safe, legal, and rare. They want it everywhere, and they want it unsafe, and they want it in people's homes. Obviously, there's no such thing as a safe abortion because it kills a human being. But the way that this works is, as I said earlier, it's a 2-pill regimen. The first pill, Mifeprex, is designed to target the baby's body for destruction. So we're talking a baby with a beating heart, a baby with neuroactivity. The brain is already developing, a baby with growing arms and legs, a baby with a jawbone, a baby with a little tiny face. I mean, there's no doubt it's a human being. This is a boy or a girl, and the pill is designed to pill is designed
What's the typical size of a baby at the recommended age for this type of abortion?
So the typical size, we could compare it to maybe the size of a strawberry. I mean,
Okay.
if you're a woman and you have a pregnancy app, there's all the fruit descriptors used to talk about the size, but we're talking, a couple inches long already by 10 weeks. So again, the baby grows by the end of the first trimester. So this drug is designed for the first trimester. By the completion of the first trimester, the entire body is complete of the child. So all the internal organs are present. All the fingers and toes are present. The facial features are present. All that child needs is time and nourishment to mature enough to survive outside the womb. So the abortion pill is killing a discernibly human child, even if that child that was only a single cell, because we all begin life, as you know, at the moment of fertilization, there's a unique individual one-celled embryo that's a human life. And even if that was the size of the child being killed, it still would be wrong and an act of murder. But in this situation, the child is discernible. You can actually see, and that's part of the horror of this too. And the trauma for women is so the process for the woman. So it kills the baby. The first drug kills the baby. The second drug forces the abortion of the baby, ultimately the expelling of the baby from the woman's body. And this is a very violent process. So this involves for the woman sometimes days up to weeks of bleeding. It involves severe cramping. It involves diarrhea. It involves vomiting. It involves sometimes hemorrhage, and it can even involve infection and death. In some cases, it has killed, again, 24 women in the United States alone. And this is a process where she's in agony. She is in agony. And the abortion industry lies and says that it's just like a period. It is not like a period. It is like actually having a miscarriage, which are horribly painful for women, traumatic, and in a percentage of these abortion pill abortions, it fails to work. So the baby may be killed, but the woman's not able to actually expel the baby. So she has to go into an abortion clinic for a second abortion that would then ultimately deliver her dead child, which would be a surgical procedure. So it's a horrific, atrocious experience for the woman. It's lethal for the child. And in no universe should this be considered healthcare. This does the complete unnatural act of a woman's body, takes a healthy pregnancy, a thriving child, destroys that child, and then forces that woman's body, tricks it into a very painful and dangerous miscarriage, which sometimes is incomplete and then needs to be followed up by a second abortion.
Lila, you've probably talked with a lot of women who've undergone this procedure. Do you find that there's, as well as the physical toll that you've described, is there also a spiritual and mental and emotional toll that it takes? And how does it compare to like a later term surgical abortion? Yeah,
so absolutely. There's a tremendous spiritual toll. I mean, we just did a series of videos at Live Action telling the stories of women who began the abortion pill procedure. And when they did so, many of them, they said they immediately felt a sense of regret after taking that first pill designed to kill the baby, the Mifeprex. And they were overcome with this sense of pain and shame and frustration and fear. And thank God there is an option to turn it around, by the way, which I think this is crucial for any listeners listening. There's abortion pill reversal. We list the website on our, we list the hotline number on our website, liveaction.org. There's abortionpillregret.com. You can actually go there and you can call the hotline. And in some communities, there's a way to potentially reverse the process of the abortion pill after that first pill is taken. So not after the second, but after the first. But this is devastating for women. I mean, it's physically devastating. It's physically potentially lethal for women, but it's also spiritually devastating because when you commit a moral wrongdoing to the extent of taking another person's life, willfully taking another person's life, especially if that's the life of your own child. I mean, there are women, and I've been privileged to interview many over the years and talk to many, where for decades they live with the pain of that decision. Maybe they felt an initial sense of relief because they thought, oh, the problem is gone of this pregnancy, but it haunts them for decades and decades. And that's because that's what moral wrongdoing does. That's what sin does. It haunts us. It's a wound that we carry, that we committed, not just against this innocent human being, but against ourselves. So a key part of our messaging at Live Action and the messaging of the pro-life movement is there needs to be a sense of reckoning with what an abortion is. It's the murder of a child. There needs to be repentance and acknowledgement of the wrongdoing so that we can then heal from it. I mean, all the women who have been hurt, the men who've been hurt by abortion, they need to be able to repent of that. And when they do, then they can access the healing that is available, which is ultimately, I think, only available in Jesus Christ. I mean, he's the one who offers to take away the sin and the shame and the weight of our sin. And so there's some amazing pro-life ministries involved in post-abortion healing, which we also promote and recommend at Live Action. Rachel's Vineyard is one that's really good. Surrendering the Secret is another one that's really, really wonderful. And we highly recommend those.
As a pro-lifer, and I'm in the same boat here, you would consider early abortions every bit as wrong and horrific as late-term abortions that are more, physically and visibly grisly. But how do we make the case to a world that values convenience and privacy so much that these are actually on par morally? I mean, what would you say to someone who sort of views a child at an earlier state, a fetus, they would call it, at an earlier state of development as less morally problematic to kill than one at a later stage?
Well, first I would ask them to consider an infant versus a teenager. If someone were to, God forbid, murder an infant, stab an infant versus also stabbing a teenager, would we consider the death of that infant, the murder of that infant, worse than the murder of the teenager, or vice versa? And I think most people would say they're both horrible. And neither are acceptable. And it's not that the teenager is more valuable because the teenager is older and more developed than the infant. They're both valuable. Similarly, when we look at any human being at any stage of life, whether they're elderly, whether they're middle-aged, whether they're a toddler, whether they're preborn, their value isn't dependent on how developed they are, on how old that they are. Their value does not hinge on whether or not they're dependent on other people. In fact, you could argue that the more dependent a human being is, so like a newborn, the more we have the responsibility to actually protect that child, as opposed to kill that child, kill that human life. So when we look at life in the womb, the same standards apply. They are human beings. The science is clear. The logic makes it very clear these are human beings, and the science reveals when human life begins at the moment of fertilization. And so taking that life has the exact same moral weight as taking a life of a newborn or a child of any other age. And there's an added moral weight when it is the mother or the father who are tasked with the responsibility to protect, to nurture. I mean, the nature of a mother is to nurture physically, emotionally, spiritually. Same with a father, to protect physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so when a parent, whether it's the mother, the father, both come together and conspire to end the life of that child, to kill that child, it is an added injustice on top of course, just directly going out and killing a stranger. It's actually ending the life of someone that you are explicitly tasked to help protect and care for.
Yeah, I know we're on opposite sides of the Reformation here, Lila, but that's one thing that John Calvin actually said about abortion, was that it's more monstrous because of the fact that this is supposed to be the place of greatest refuge and shelter is the mother's womb, that you should take away a child's life before he or she has even begun to enjoy it, that makes it worse. I'm speaking with Lila Rose, president and founder of Live Action, who's heading up a campaign to expose and remove the abortion pill from the market in the U.S. You're listening to Upstream. Lila, Frederick Osborne, a president of the Population Council, said back in the 1950s that birth control and abortion are, quote, turning out to be the great eugenic advances of our time. Has that changed now that we're, decades and almost a lifetime removed from his influence? Would you describe the modern pro-abortion movement as eugenic in its nature?
I think that the vision of the eugenicist, which is a more perfect population, less of the poor, less of the disabled, less of those deemed unfit, is being realized. I mean, you just look at the fact that there are some statistics say past 70% of children who are diagnosed with Down syndrome in utero are killed before birth. There are countries like the Netherlands a couple of years ago who are celebrating 100% free of Down syndrome. They weren't free of Down syndrome children. They just murdered them all. They killed them all. Right. So that would be a eugenics dream. That would be a eugenicist dream, that we can ultimately eradicate those that are seen as unfit or the poor. I mean, there's this very toxic mindset in American politics and amongst American elitist billionaires like the Gates Foundation or Warren Buffett or George Soros, some of them not even Americans, just global philanthropists, as they like to say, that's anything but philanthropy. What they're actually looking at is more poor nations, less developed countries, and they're seeing their populations, their growing and blossoming populations, as a bad thing. They think more children in the world are bad if they're going to be in poorer families. And instead of working, of course, to lift families out of poverty and improve infrastructures, improve, the school system, or get clean water for families, or improve the democracies that they live in. Instead, it's focused on killing their infants, killing their smallest children. So that is the eugenic mindset. And unfortunately, it is alive and well today. I think there's also a big reason for today's abortion industry today, Shane, is the sexual revolution. And I think a lot of that, I know you wanted to talk about contraception. I know the quote includes this, seeing contraception and abortion going hand in hand, and they do go hand in hand. The widespread use and acceptance of contraception has created the abortion market, the market for abortion, the abortion mindset in our country. And as long as we permit the idea that sex, as long as we embrace the idea, the false idea, that sex is not about marriage and children, but instead it is about me and my pleasure and what I want out of life, only that, we have ultimately turned inside out the meaning of sex. We've broken the meaning of sex, and we will suffer consequences because of that. And we are suffering. That's what we're seeing in our culture, with not just STI rates and broken relationships and broken families, but we see it in the abortion rate, because people are divorcing what God, the purpose of how God designed sex, divorcing both the procreative and the unitive out of sex. So taking it out of marriage, the context of marriage, and taking it away from the potential for children.
Right, and we could distinguish between a contraceptive and an abortifacient, a deliberately abortifacient drug, because there's debate about some of the chemicals on the borderline there, whether they have abortifacient potential. But of course, you're right, Lila, that the mindset behind all of this is really the same, and that's what we do on this podcast. We're trying to get upstream to the source of these ideas and why our culture is the way it is. And I think Mark Regnerus has probably made the best case that the pill, meaning contraception, not RU 30. Is it, which number is it? RU 46. Not the abortion pill is actually a key factor in changing the way we think about sex and marriage and childbearing, and the thing that has sundered them and separated them and made it so that we believe as a culture very deeply that we can have one without the other there.
Yeah, and just to break that down more, I think that's a great point. First of all, when it comes to contraception, most contraception today, hormonal contraception, is an abortifacient, can act as an abortifacient as well as a contraceptive. And that's because it's designed to weaken the lining of the uterus, the mother's uterine wall, so that the baby cannot attach. So even the fine print, if you look at your birth control pill drugs, if someone has them, I recommend throwing them away once they learn this. They look at the insert, and it says that is an action that it can do. It's actually designed to both kill a new life, kill a little embryo, as well as act as a contraceptive. So there's that. But then there's just the question of contraception. Let's just say, it's possible for contraception to be made without killing any embryos, right? If that were possible, hormonal contraceptives. Even in that situation, the contraception is designed to not treat a problem or a disease, but contraception by nature is designed to actually make a healthy part of our bodies, our reproductive organs, which are in this case fertile, which is why they want to use a contraceptive, designed to render them infertile and to sterilize them temporarily. And that's against God's design. I mean, God gave us our bodies and the functions of our bodies as gifts. Our fertility, I mean, if you look at God's word, throughout the Bible, fertility is praised as a gift. Children are praised as gifts. So contraception is as old as history. There have been people trying to subvert the purpose and the procreative power of sex, but contraception is something that goes against the faith of Christians. And this was true up until the Reformation, and even for a few hundred years after the Reformation, because even Calvin and Luther were against contraception. It wasn't until the Lambeth Convention in the early part of the 20th century when a small group of Anglican bishops got together and said, okay, in some very, very rare cases, it can be acceptable for married couples to use contraception, which went against, again, hundreds of years, 2 millennia of Christian teaching that said that the contraception was against God's plan. And why does Christian tradition say that? well, first of all, it's biblical. God talks about the importance of multiplying. He says, go forth and multiply, fill the earth. God talks about the beauty and the gift of fertility and children. But we also look at God's design, the way our bodies are designed. We know that sex is designed to do two things. Sex can bond two people together. It's powerfully bonding for two people, which is why it's such a gift to a marriage and the intimacy of spouses. But it's also designed during the time when a woman's fertile. A man is always fertile. There's only a certain period of time, a healthy man's always fertile. There's only a period of time each month when a woman is fertile, but it's designed to be able to bring life into the world. And so we can work with God's design. This doesn't mean that Christian families have to have children every time they have sex. That's not possible. And it also doesn't mean that Christian families aren't allowed to, for serious.
What was Pope Francis's phrase? Breeding like rabbits. We don't have to do that.
Well, he wasn't saying big families are wrong. He's saying that we do have a responsibility as parents to look at our families, and if there's a grave reason, a serious reason, to space children potentially, or to delay having children for a season. But it has to be a serious reason, and we have to work with our bodies to do it and God's design. We don't use an artificial contraceptive or a barrier method, which divorces the procreative from sex. It renders that act infertile or sterile. That's not God's design. We actually can work with God's design the way our bodies are designed. And it also goes to the very purpose of sex. I mean, sex is saying fully yes, becoming one flesh with your spouse. But when we say, I'm going to become fully yes to you and become one flesh, except I'm going to cut off my fertility from you artificially. Like I'm going to just, whether I get sterilized or I use a barrier method or I use hormonal contraception, I'm going to cut off that fertility. That not only aggravates the purpose of sex, but it says no to love. It says no to your own spouse and the unity with your spouse. So that's why the Christian church has taught for centuries upon centuries that contraception is wrong. And it is no surprise, Shane, that in today's culture, where there's so much contraception being used, like after the church, the Anglican, unfortunately, church did this thing in the Lambeth Convention in the early 20th century, it just opened the floodgates. And now Christians today think contraception is totally morally acceptable, it's fine, but it is not. It has created the abortion problem, because now we see that sex, we have decided that we can subvert the purpose of sex. We can choose what sex means. We can decide that sex is just for our pleasure, or we can decide that sex is just for, we're entitled to have children. The flip side, of course, is in vitro fertilization and some of these reproductive technologies where we take life into our own hands and we divorce. We now say children don't need to be conceived in sex or conceived in love.
We've tried to have sex without children. Now we're trying to have children without sex.
And that both violate God's design. And both are the reason for so much of the abortion and the discarded embryos and the destroyed embryos in vitro clinics. I mean, on both sides. There is no surprise. This is from the Guttmacher Institute. You quoted them earlier. It's Planned Parenthood's research arm. Even they admit that 50% of the women that come in for abortions were using a contraceptive in the month that they became pregnant. So half of the women in this country were using contraception in the month that they became pregnant. This idea that contraception prevents children from coming into the world, yes, it can, but we know it fails because sex is so powerful, it can create life. And it actually creates an abortion mindset where we feel we are entitled, whether we're Christians or not, we feel we're entitled to sex without children. And so we try to sterilize it. We try to render our own bodies infertile. We try to cut off that life power of sex from our own spouse, from each other. And what do? We create this abortion mentality where now a child that might result from sex accidentally, right, even though it's designed to create life, is now seen as a threat. That child is now seen as a burden. And that's completely inverting God's design. Instead of saying, thank God we're blessed with a child, we're saying, oh gosh, the contraception failed. Oh, how horrible.
It was an accident. Something went wrong. No, something went right. Your bodies did exactly what they're supposed to do.
This language we have of unplanned pregnancy, right? Unplanned pregnancy, unexpected pregnancy. I mean, I understand because our culture is so broken and there are so many people living broken lives and lives that are not God's design. But pregnancy by design comes from sex, which by design can create new life. There should not be this idea of an unplanned pregnancy or an unexpected pregnancy if you know what sex is designed for. But our society, we've told ourselves a lie. We've told ourselves a lie that sex is on my terms, that sex is what I want it to be, whether I'm married or not, whether I'm a Christian or not. And if I don't want to have kids right now, but I still want to have sex, and I want to be closed off to life, but I want to be open to just the pleasure of sex or having fun with my partner or whatever, then I'm entitled to that. And so then a pregnancy becomes a mistake. That is not God's design.
Lila, you used the phrase a second ago, abortion mindset. And I want to ask you a question here that has to do with that here as we come up to the end of our time. Yeah. There was a recent report that a significant number of pro-life pregnancy care centers are actually starting to offer contraception, presumably the varieties that they believe are non-abortifacient, to those patients who come in, and there's not really a restriction over, I guess from clinic to clinic it may be different, but there's not really a restriction that was mentioned between married and unmarried couples. But in any case, the abortion mindset is at play there. What are your thoughts on this? Is this kind of a mission drift issue? Is this a betrayal of their purpose as pro-life organizations?
Yeah, I think it is a betrayal, sadly. I think it's immoral, and it's extremely destructive. We are trying to solve a problem, like the building is burning and we're pouring gasoline on the burning building instead of pouring pure water on it. And again, if these are faith-based pregnancy centers, I think it goes against the Bible. It goes against the tradition of the moral tradition of Christianity, which says that sex is designed not just for marriage, but sex is by design written into our bodies for the potential to create human life. And if we sterilize that, even if it's temporary with a barrier method, if we sterilize that, if we render it infertile, that goes against God's design. And we can work with our bodies. Again, our bodies, God created, designed, again, that keyword, the purpose of our bodies, to not be fertile nonstop. So there's times that a woman is fertile and times that she's not. We should get to know our bodies. We should get to know these temples that God has given us that are holy, that are set aside, and work with the design that God created instead of going the way of the world, going the way of the culture, which is throwing gasoline on fire. And that's why 50% of the women walking into abortion facilities were on a contraceptive method in the month that they got pregnant. So those pregnancy centers unwittingly, I don't know that, the mindset of their higher ups, and I would love to talk with any of them if they ever wanted to talk with me. They are creating a market for abortion clinics by doing that. Instead, what we should be doing are two things. First of all, teaching the gifts of our bodies and the science of a woman's fertility, helping her understand her cycle so she can work with it. She can understand and appreciate her own body. Men have respect for women's bodies, their own fertility, and this gift that God gave us. And second of all, understand the proper morality around sex, that sex is designed for a lifelong commitment, a oneness between a man and a woman, marriage, right? We know that. And it's designed to bring human beings into the world, if it's working right, if the people are healthy. And that's a good thing. And we should celebrate that. We should teach that. We should support that. And that should become part of the church's mission, because that's how God designed it. That's a gift from God.
Well, this is an issue you're deeply passionate about, Lila, and something that we need to pay attention to as Christians. And we've just illustrated the impact here that it has with the rise of the abortion pill and the do-it-yourself abortion movement. Lila, tell us how our listeners can get involved if they've become similarly motivated by this conversation to do something.
Sure. Well, we'd love to get involved in live action. We have an incredibly important campaign right now to get the abortion pill banned from the market, and most of all, to spread awareness so that people have the truth about development of the child in the womb, the risks of the abortion pill, and they can spread the word about this very atrocious, this atrocity. And also, we can spread the word about abortion pill reversal. So if you go to liveaction.org, there's a petition to the FDA that you can sign to ban the pill, and there's also resources so that you can spread this information in your church, in your community, with friends and family.
Well, my guest today has been Lila Rose, president and founder of Live Action, one of the most prolific champions of the young pro-life movement and the leader of a new push to expose the reality of the abortion pill. You can follow her work at liveaction.org. And to sign the petition to ban the abortion pill in the U.S., come to breakpoint.org, click on this podcast, and we'll link you to it. Lila, thanks so much for joining me today on the Breakpoint Podcast. What a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Upstream with Shane Morris. For resources and more commentary on Christianity and culture, visit colsoncenter.org. Upstream with Shane Morris is a production of the Colson Center Podcast Network.